That's all we got for tonight. Thanks for watching Banfield.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Banfield. I'm Laura Ingle in for Ashleigh tonight. I'm so glad you're here. We've got a big show. It's been 4 days since Sean Diddy Combs stood before a judge and asked yet again to leave the less than friendly confines of the Metropolitan Detention Center. A barrage of documents has since been submitted to the court, and tonight we're learning that a security professional visited the undisclosed apartment where Combs is hoping to spend his days and nights leading up to trial. That happened today. We'll break down the arguments for and against bail and ask what exactly is taking this judge so long. That's straight ahead. Also ahead, a chilling moment at the Lecter County Courthouse. For the first time since the Lecter County Sheriff killed a judge in his own chambers, he came back to answer the murder charge against him. Now, it is impossible to argue the whodunit in this awful case. Sean Mickey Steins, now the former sheriff, is on high-resolution video pulling his weapon and shooting Judge Kevin Mullins 8 times. We've seen it. Whodunit is now the why done it. What made the lawman and longtime friend of the victim snap here? Some clues have emerged, and some people in that remote slice of eastern Kentucky are now talking to NewsNation. Our investigative producer joins me live in a few minutes, and she's going to break it all down. And it's hard to imagine more helpless, defenseless targets than elderly residents of retirement homes, which is probably why a notorious serial killer in Texas chose them. Tonight, you'll meet a woman whose 92-year-old mother was not only murdered, but robbed by a roving predator who may have killed more than 20 elderly victims. All of that's ahead in a jam-packed hour of Banfield. But first, whether a federal judge in Manhattan decides to make Sean Combs' holiday dreams come true and let him out of jail, or whether he keeps Diddy locked up tight for many months to come, you can't say he didn't think about it, right? Another day has come and gone with no decision on Sean Combs' fourth attempt at bail. But the defense is optimistic. How do we know this? Well, because just this morning, Team Diddy sent a security expert to eyeball the 3-bedroom Upper East Side apartment where Diddy's team is proposing he should live under house arrest. That's right, they scouted it out. The defense says they'll install cameras and other surveillance measures, and guards will be in charge of Diddy's phone and will record all of his calls. They promise every single one. By the way, the defense says Sean Combs is presumed innocent and has the right to address negative pretrial publicity. Prosecutors say, not so fast. They say even from jail, Diddy has done everything in his power to harass and intimidate his adversaries and bolster his friends, along with his own image. They say that he's determined to taint the jury pool and obstruct justice. And they say the self-proclaimed bad boy for life has demonstrated a pattern of violence. We all remember that shocking video of Combs viciously beating his then-girlfriend, Cassie Ventura, in a hotel hallway in 2016. But as far back as 1999, Combs was accused of beating a record producer with a champagne bottle, a telephone, and a chair, all over the use of footage in a music video. Later that year was the infamous Manhattan nightclub shooting where 2 people were wounded, and rapper Shine took the blame, despite witnesses pointing at Diddy. In 2015, let's go through this list. Combs was charged with assault with a deadly weapon after an altercation with a football coach at his son's university. That charge was later dropped. So, bail or no bail, that is the question. And it is really a close call, it seems. Or is this judge just dragging out the suspense? I'm joined now by 2 longtime friends of this program. Dave Ehrenberg is the state attorney for Palm Beach County in Florida. Mark Garagos, you know him. He is a renowned defense attorney and co-host of the Reasonable Doubt podcast. Thank you both for being here tonight. Dave, I want to start with you. You're here on set. Let's start with Diddy's pretrial communication. You know, there has been a lot of back and forth about limiting his statements. Is there a danger at all of violating his First Amendment rights? What's going on?
Good to be with you, Laura. You know, when you're a prisoner, you don't have the same First Amendment rights as the rest of us. You have a lot of rights that are curtailed. And by the way, it's great to be with you and Mark. I like how he's branding his podcast with a sweatshirt. Yep. Looking good, my friend. So they don't have the same expansive First Amendment rights that the rest of us do.
Right.
So you also have to take into account potential threats to outsiders. Normally, yes, you have the First Amendment right to contact anyone you want, but not when you're a defendant, not when you're being accused of tampering with witnesses. And that is going to be a big obstacle for him to overcome to get pretrial release.
Yeah, this has been a big contention in court. I was at the courthouse on Friday. Mark, first, can you fill us in on why you think the judge hasn't decided on bail? What is the inside story here? Because we've got these new court filings this week. Are you surprised at all to hear, United States versus Trump cited in the argument? There's a long list of things going on here and obviously other things that are redacted.
I'm not surprised in the least because the defense filing, which I think was prepared by Alexandra Shapiro, who's probably the appellate lawyer, federal appellate lawyer around, she runs through kind of the cases that you've heard me argue many a time, Laura, which are basically the Shepard versus Maxwell, the Gentile versus State Bar of Nevada, and all of the other cases, and now the latest edition, which is Trump. And basically what it is when there's a First Amendment and Sixth Amendment kind of a intersection, you cannot just clamp down on the First Amendment. And by the way, one of the things that I've always complained about is the prosecution likes to come out and they like to announce, we've got a RICO action or we've made this huge bust, whether it's Diddy or anybody else. And then they want to run and clamp down on the defense and say, you can't talk, you can't say this, you're trying to obstruct. Trump has been masterful in the way he's pushed back against this nonsense, and the courts now are starting to say, no, you can't go in there and just slam the defense and then hope that the defense is not going to be able to push back. In fact, my argument has always been it's malpractice per se for the defense lawyer to just sit by and let his prosecutor kind of slime his client. So I think that's one of the reasons that they have, it's taken a little time, because a lot of what they're claiming is obstruction is nothing more than a pushback against all of the nonsense that's been out there.
Dave, what do you think about that? And also, the prosecution says that the jury could be tainted with all that's going on. Of course, we hear that when we're going into any big trial, right?
I don't think the jury really is going to be tainted by Diddy's post. Also, when you're looking for a jury, you're not looking for a jury that's an empty vessel, a blank slate. They can know about the case. They can read the post. They just have to say that they will remain objective and just follow the evidence and the law. And that's all. That's why you can get a jury in any case.
Right.
But I do think the government has a point that Diddy has proven previously that he has attempted to contact witnesses. He's tried to obstruct witnesses before. He's used a banned app behind bars. He's used another inmate's phone to try to get his message out.
And the three-way calls.
So, he's been through this before. It's not like a first-time offender here. He has a rap sheet, so to speak. And as a result, that's the reason I think that he's going to remain behind bars. It's not that they're worried about prejudicing the jury at trial. It's that they just think he is a danger to the witnesses and a threat to keeping them quiet. And by the way, the fact that there are now 100 new victims that have come forward with Mr. Busby's civil lawsuits, alleged victims, shows you the value of keeping him behind bars, because I wonder if they would have come forward if he was out on the loose.
Well, we have been told from our sources. Go ahead, Mark. But I was just going to...
Let me respond to that, Dave.
All right.
If you read the filings in this case, the defense has specifically said, look, there's one victim. And by the way, all of these so-called 1-800 Diddy victims that have been promoted by Mr. Busby, none of those, they're trying to come under the cloak of anonymity. They have not superseded as of yet. And so far, you've got one so-called victim, and I would call it a complaining witness, who tried to sell her story first as a book, and then when that didn't work, all of a sudden filed a lawsuit. So I'm not so sure. I just say, wait a second. When you start to examine what the actual charges are here, it involves one person. The so-called second person, the defense pointed out in their filings, The prosecution's never talked to that person. So, saying there's hundreds out there, yet the indictment itself only has one person.
Well, Mark, also, there's a lot of people that have come forward now that he has been arrested and he's behind bars. They feel safe to come forward and file some of these complaints. That's what we've been hearing. That's what we've been hearing, not only from Busby, but from other attorneys as well.
That's what I said. It's a 1-800-DIDDY. It's the next class action kind of practice area after asbestos and talc. I mean, give me a break. There hasn't been one credible one that has been put forward so far. And in fact, two of the ones in the Southern District that were filed, both of the federal judges, I think two separate federal judges, have said, no, you're not filing those anonymously. And then remember, there was yet a third one where the lawyer withdrew because all of a sudden it came out that it was nothing but a shakedown. So every single one of these, when it's scrutinized, seems to fall apart.
Well, it has to go one at a time, right, Dave? And this $50 million bond that has been proposed, let's get back to, is he going to get out or not? The house arrest, the security restricted, the community that he's going to be in, the communication. Why hasn't that been enough? And why do you think the judge, is he going to look at it now, maybe that the security has gone over there and done a walkthrough and is going to present to the judge, look, we think that this is a safe place for him to be?
Yes, but remember, the apartment was not the first choice. There was that house in
Miami.
Right, where not far from me. I'm on the other side of the tracks. But he wanted this house in Miami where they have a boat dock. And the judge said, no, you're not getting that. So this is the next option. And they're going to scour the place and make sure there's no loopholes there. But remember, the alleged conduct here took place behind closed doors. So you want to prevent him from being a threat to the community to do it again behind closed doors. I think the biggest problem for Diddy is the obstruction, is the tampering with witnesses possibility. And the more the evidence comes out about using an illegal app or a phone that's contraband behind bars, the three-way calls, that's going to be his biggest problem, not necessarily the house itself.
Right. Mark, why wouldn't they propose that maybe security would be done not by their own team? That seems a little, I don't know, that they're going to be coming in and watching over him. They're going to choose the security team. Shouldn't they maybe offer the judge, say, hey, if you guys have somebody that you want to have come in here to be the guard, maybe that would be a better way to go?
What do you mean? Because I think what they're proposing is a third party, not his security, but a third party security company, I believe. But I have heard arguments on both sides of that. I mean, I've heard the argument, well, just because you can afford the security, you shouldn't get it. I've also heard the arguments, well, just because you can afford the security, you shouldn't get it. So, I mean, you can make the argument either way. I think Dave is to some degree right. I think it was a non-starter to propose a house out of state. But remember, this is somebody who, at his lawyer's urging or advice, he came to New York. He knew that this indictment was coming. He did not flee once he knew it. I mean, Dave will tell you, anybody who saw that show of force by Homeland Security, and has a legal team, has to know that the indictment is coming. So if he was going to flee, he would have fled a long time ago. So the fact that he came to New York, submitted himself to the jurisdiction, and is now saying, I'm going to stay here, I'm willing to stay wherever you want, under whatever conditions. And by the way, when the judge asked a very poignant question, which is, government, be prepared to answer why he's any different than the Abercrombie case. He didn't say Abercrombie, he cited it. But the gentleman, the 80-year-old gentleman who's under indictment, who the government in the Eastern District agreed or stipulated to his release. That was, I thought, very telling.
That was very telling, and you're right. I was there at that court hearing in Islip, Mark, and the wife was asked by the judge in that hearing, do you understand that if your husband flees, you're losing your house? She said, yes, it was put up, and off he went. We watched him walk out of the courthouse. Do you see that happening, Mark? Do you see him getting bail and walking out of the MDC? Is that something that is a reality?
Yes, I do, actually. I think there's a significant possibility that he will get bail. He actually should, if you examine all of the the evidence and you take a look at the Bail Reform Act. And by the way, that's a very good point, Laura, because I remember the first time I was in federal court decades ago, and I understood it's slightly different in federal court than it is in most state courts. If you put up your house and the defendant violates, basically, you can lose everything. That's not necessarily the way it is or most people's understanding of bail. So when you put up a $50 million package, that's a real package. That's not illusory. That's not some bondsman where you're paying a premium to. That's real money with real property secured by real assets.
And real consequences. You're right. Dave, real quick before we go, how could a potential jury view him getting out on bail, being held at the Upper East Side apartment, held or, watched over? How does that play out for a jury as they're moving through a case like this?
I don't think it really matters. They're going to pick jurors who are vetted, who can put aside their biases and what they know and just follow the facts and the law. I think it's a bigger deal what he's wearing at the trial. Will he be wearing his snazzy clothes without being shackled? Or will he be looking like an inmate? And so that will have an impact on the jurors' perceptions, as well possibly whether he testifies. Although the prosecution is not allowed to refer to that, that's something that jurors often consider.
All right, Mark, really quick, is he going to wear his snazzy clothes if when he goes to trial?
There's a lot of things you can say about Sean, but one of them is he never looks like a slob.
Okay,
It's true.
All right, we'll leave it there. Mark Garagos and Dave Ehrenberg, thank you both very much for being here tonight. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Mark. Still to come, the shooting is captured on video, but it's what happened before that will determine whether the shooter ends up on death row or gets a far lighter sentence. Could that happen? Or maybe no sentence at all? NewsNation has been asking questions in that remote Kentucky county where the sheriff gunned down a judge in cold blood. And what we're hearing is almost as eye-opening as that awful video we've seen. Our investigative producer joins me next, live. Former Kentucky sheriff who opened fire on a sitting judge in his own chambers have a real puzzle on their hands. On one hand, they insist their client, Sean Mickey Steins, didn't commit murder. On the other hand, Steins is seen on that crystal clear video. You can see a still of it there, pulling his weapon and shooting Judge Kevin Mullins point blank 8 times. Look how clear that is. Yesterday, Steins returned to the scene of the crime to plead not guilty to 1 count of murder of a public official, which is a capital offense. Now, he's being held in a different county for obvious reasons, and this was his first time back in the Lecter County courthouse since the shooting. And while no one's denying that he's the shooter, the defense calls it a moment of extreme emotional disturbance and says murder is the wrong charge. They won't even concede to manslaughter. I want to bring in NewsNation investigative producer Allison Weiner. So great to have you here. I know you've been digging into this, Allison. All right, the grand jury indictment was just a few days ago. Stein said not guilty. That was his plea yesterday, but neither sheds any light on the $1 million question. Why? Why did this happen? What do we know?
Well, we now still don't know exactly why it happened, but I think the defense did give us a little bit of insight, pointing to the fact that a deposition that the sheriff had given just days before the shooting would be part of the defense. Plus, extreme emotional distress. You can see where we're heading with this. I mean, it's going to be an insanity defense of some sort, which means also that the defense is looking at he didn't plan to go in there and shoot the judge, which again begs the question, then why did he? So I have to say that the people I talk to are confused. They know both men. Everybody knows everybody. When I was in Kentucky and I was in Whitesburg where the shooting happened and I went, just sort of all over, they all professed to be in shock. They didn't understand why. But I think that we're beginning to see a little bit of details coming out. Not the stuff that you're seeing on Twitter or on social media, because everybody has an opinion about what the reason was, but some actual information I got from sources while I was there.
Yeah, I imagine you said everybody knows everybody, and it must be so weird for everybody to see their sheriff in jail garb and handcuffed and coming in. What did you find out about the sheriff's family situation right before the shooting and how that might be a factor? Because I know that you found out some good information here. So what do we know?
Well, it's really interesting, but several sources said that the sheriff was was kicked out of his home by his wife. They had some sort of a dispute, the night before the shooting. And that was the reason that he was in plain clothes, because he wasn't able to have a uniform wherever he was, and that he showed up. When you see him in the judge's chambers, he's not wearing his sheriff's outfit, or sheriff's uniform, I should say. We also know that the sheriff on the day of the shooting had a lunch with the judge. And what gets left out of that story is the fact that there were other people at that lunch. And the sheriff attempted to bring up some subject. The judge stopped him and said, let's talk about it in chambers. Come by after lunch. The sheriff then, we know about his movements, at some point went to see his daughter, and she didn't want to talk to him. So he then drove to the courthouse and he went to see the judge. And we do know from the facts that, from what has been released, that we know so far, that he picked up the phone and tried to call his daughter from the judge's chambers. She didn't answer. Then he used the judge's phone and she answered. So we have a situation where the sheriff had, domestic issues at home. Clearly, he was kicked out of his house. There's been some dispute from different sources about when it happened, but my sources are saying it was that night before the actual shooting. And he was in a great deal of distress.
Allison, I want to go back to that lunch, the other people that were there that saw these two men eating a meal together, breaking bread. Did anybody say, was it heated? Was it strained? Did it seem normal?
They said it seemed normal. I asked some of the people that were there. They said it seemed normal. There was no sign of anything. But what we're hearing, about the sheriff's demeanor is a little odd. Not from that lunch, but from the deposition. I mean, that's why the defense is looking that way.
All right. So what about this pending civil case against the sheriff? How is that possibly related? Do we know anything more about that case?
We know a lot, and that's kind of where everything's going.
Okay.
The civil lawsuit, it's a civil rights lawsuit that was filed by a plaintiff who alleged that the sheriff knew or should have known that she was being, sexually assaulted by one of his deputies. And that he actually, the lawsuit says that he didn't properly train. He's accused of not properly training that deputy. And the deputy was trading, preferential treatment for sexual favors. And basically, we're talking about women who are in have drug offenses and are trying to get into rehab, not go to jail. And it's all based on one person who is in charge of their ankle bracelet if they get home detention, who can make a phone call and the next minute they're in jail. So it's kind of a terrible situation. And I spoke to the lawyer, Ned Pillersdorf, who is the lawyer for the plaintiff in the civil rights action. And he said that he'd actually received a phone call from the prosecutor asking about Sheriff Stein's demeanor during that deposition. So the prosecutor is looking into it as well and wanting to find out from witnesses what he was like. And Ned told me that the demeanor was he halted, he didn't answer questions, he didn't hear certain questions and just didn't even respond. And if you want to know, is what Ned said, what the sheriff's demeanor was like in the deposition, you should see how he was in the first hearing in court. How he listened to the judge and didn't hear certain questions. He didn't respond to some things. This is a guy that was in court all the time and was known to be very direct, very forceful. He's a sheriff. And none of that. He's almost like in a trance during that initial hearing. So that's how Ned described his demeanor.
Wow, this is incredible. Still ongoing. Boots on the ground reporting. Thank you so much, Allison Weiner. Still to come. We're going to have more from you. I know that we're going to keep checking back in with you. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
All right. Bye. We'll talk soon. All right. Still to come. Solving unsolvable crimes. 50 years ago, a young hitchhiker was picked up and stabbed to death somewhere between Minneapolis and Chicago. Police were stumped for decades until a group of scientists identified a suspect who was then tracked down after all these years. and arrested. It is an incredible story, and it's happening every day in police departments all over the country. Could cold cases be a thing of the past? I'll ask the sleuths who solved the hitchhiker murder. That's coming up next. For the Golden State Killer and Bryan Kohberger cases, a lot of people had never heard of investigative genetic genealogy. But if you've ever traced your ancestry or built a family tree using only a cheek swab and a website, you know exactly what IgG is all about. In the Idaho student murder case, the FBI used DNA from the knife sheath at the crime scene to identify Kohberger's family and then Kohberger. And as many know, the same process helped catch the Golden State Killer, who raped and murdered at least 13 people across California in the 70s and 80s. The father of JonBenet Ramsey, John Ramsey, thinks IgG is the last and best hope of solving JonBenet's murder almost 28 years ago. Here's what he said on this show just last night.
I met with the founders of Othram Labs, which is one of the cutting-edge labs that's out there. They'd be happy to help. I sent a letter to the chief based on my meeting with what I learned with Othram, and that is, A, they don't destroy any DNA when they do testing on it anymore, which was one of the concerns. B, they have the ability to separate DNA, mixed DNA samples, which is one of the issues with the sample they got in 1997. They had an unidentified male DNA sample in early 1997. It was mixed apparently with JonBenet's blood DNA. That can now technology-wise be separated. That's huge. And the third thing, they have the ability to do familial genealogy research, which has been wildly successful in solving old cold cases. That's what we're asking the police to do.
And just to be clear, that has not happened yet, but IgG has now solved dozens, maybe hundreds of cases, including a cold case murder from 50 years ago. In 1974, 25-year-old Mary Shalisis was hitchhiking from Minneapolis to Chicago when she was picked up, stabbed to death, and dumped somewhere in Wisconsin. It's a horrible case, and for decades it seemed like the crime would never be solved until the IgG team from Ramapo College in New Jersey started working on it. They analyzed a hair follicle from the scene and compared it to family trees from genealogy databases all across the internet. Eventually, they traced it to a man named John Miller, who's now 84 years old and who, quote, confirmed his involvement when police turned up on his doorstep. I'm joined now by David Gurney and Karen Binder, Director and Assistant Director of the Investigative Genetic Genealogy Center at Ramapo College. Thank you guys so much for being here tonight. Wow, what a story. David Gurney and Karen Binder, the last thing, as we look at this case, let's just start with why you chose that case, how you got involved, and just where you started. David, we'll start with you.
So this was a case where we were actually contacted by the law enforcement agency who heard about us from other casework that we'd done, and we were just happy to step in and provide any assistance that we could.
Karen, when you take a look at the cases, you must have had kind of a menu of items to look through, right, of different cases, different years, decades. What did you think when you honed in on this one?
So with this case, we were referred this case very early on in the Investigative Genetic Genealogy Center's launch. This was our 10th case that we had accepted in all of our, more than 70 cases now. And so it was an easy choice, 50-year cold case, the opportunity to solve this. What we were provided with access to for further laboratory testing was the leftover DNA sample from previous evidence that had been tested. So that was sent to one of our laboratory partners who generated a SNP profile, and then we got to work.
David, we just played that clip from John Ramsey that we had last night. It was an incredible interview, and it's such a sad story that we all remember. And every Christmas, we come back to this story and we say, okay, it's this year. It's been 28 years. Why hasn't this type of DNA technology been used, this investigative genetic genealogy? Is this something that you guys would take up if asked?
I mean, we are happy to look at any case that comes to us. IgG depends on a lot of things coming together in the right way. There has to be biological material from which the kind of genetic profile that we rely on can be generated. So all those questions are things that we would ask the law enforcement agency before we even got started on the case. So certainly happy to talk about it if anyone reaches out.
Karen, that would be interesting, right? If you got a phone call from Boulder Police that said that they wanted you to take a look at this, why isn't this type of technology being used on each and every cold case? Because we've heard this story before, not just John Ramsey, because police departments have to invite people in. That's our understanding.
That's part of it. And, as much as we would love to see investigative genetic genealogy implemented in more cases, it's unfortunately not a slam dunk for every single case. So there are elements, the quality of the DNA evidence available, how many persons are involved in a mixture, a 3 or more person mixture. Additionally, even the race and ethnicity of the subject that you're trying to identify can impact the solvability of the case. So while it's a great tool for so many cases, it's not going to work in every single cold case.
Yeah, David, so many people have signed up for Ancestry.com, 23andMe. In fact, they make good holiday gifts, many would say, and on other sites. A lot of DNA is on file. Will you always get a hit? There are some people who you won't find a match for, obviously. So which sites do you have access to, and which ones do you hope to have access to in the future?
So one of the primary misconceptions that we face about IgG is exactly this question: what databases do we have access to? At this point, we only have access to 2 relatively small databases. They are GEDmatch Pro and Family Tree DNA. So if you have taken a DNA test from Ancestry or 23andMe, which are by far the largest databases out there, Ancestry alone has about 25 to 30 million profiles, we are not able to see you as a match to any of our cases unless you make the extra choice to download your data from Ancestry and upload it to GEDmatch Pro. So this is, of course, a stumbling block for us. It means that we have access to approximately 3 million profiles in many of the cases that we work. If we somehow got access to Ancestry, if they made the decision to give their consumers the choice to participate in IgG searching, I imagine that many, many cases that are right now unsolvable would become solved within a couple of days or weeks.
Wow, it's really incredible. Karen and David, we've got to leave it right there. We hope to have you back. David Gurney, Karen Binder, thank you very much for being here tonight. We'll check back in with you soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys, and congratulations on solving that case. The last thing a resident of a senior center or nursing home should have to worry about is, of all things, a serial killer. But for over a 2-year period in Texas, more than 20 people ranging in age from 76 to 94 were murdered and robbed by a person they thought was a healthcare worker. The daughter of one of those victims will join me live when we come back. Agree. Family is top of mind this time of year, and tops on anybody's wish list for the people we hold dear is safety, freedom from danger. It is a basic thing, but it's everything, no matter how young or old we and our loved ones are. Shannon Dion learned that lesson in a very tragic way when her 92-year-old mother, Doris Gleason, died in a retirement home near Dallas. A new episode of People magazine Investigates tells her story.
The funeral home arrives, and I tell them that I would like the jewelry off of her body. And they point to the kitchen countertop where there are these 2 rings. And I said, well, where is the necklace? There's a guardian angel necklace that she wears all the time. Where is it? We start looking, and the necklace is missing. And I don't know what it was that drove me, but I went to my mother's purse and got her billfold because there was the cash that we had just taken out the Friday before, and here it is Sunday morning. There was no cash, and I noticed the front top dresser drawer was ajar, and that's when I knew something was wrong.
It wasn't until 2018, 2 years later, that Shannon learned her mother hadn't just been robbed, she'd been murdered by a serial killer. Billy Shamirmir was a healthcare worker from Kenya who was finally arrested after he robbed and attacked a 91-year-old woman who survived. Now, he was charged with 22 counts of murder, convicted of 2, and last year was himself murdered in prison by another inmate. Now Shannon is telling her mother's story, warning everybody she can about the dangers of our most vulnerable family members face. Shannon Dion is here with us. We want to thank you very much for joining us today. Shannon, first, so sorry for your loss and what you and your family have been going through. I can't even imagine. Thank you for being with us tonight to tell us your story. Can you walk us through how the police responded when you told them something was off about your mother's death? You know, your daughter Hart knew something was wrong.
Thank you for having me and letting me share this story and hopefully help protect seniors out there. The police arrived when we reported that there had been a theft. They dusted for fingerprints. They questioned staff. They put on an investigation, but they just didn't have really anything to work with. And it wasn't helpful that management was not forthcoming that there had been other unattended deaths with robberies at this property. So the police were investigating each case individually without the full picture. So it was extremely frustrating. You know, for 1 hour, I grieved my mother as a natural death. But then after that, it was clear that something was wrong, but there wasn't any way of putting any pieces together.
I am absolutely outraged for you. Why do you think police tend to dismiss cases involving the elderly? Why don't they listen to the family members? And I know from having family members in assisted living, this is very, very hard when management isn't cooperating. So why, and then you turn to the police and you say something here is wrong. Why do you think they dismiss these cases?
It's ageism. It's just so easy to say they're old. And they died. Some families were told when they reported missing jewelry, oh, well, old ladies put it in their underwear drawer. It just is. My mother had climbed 4 flights of stairs because she couldn't wait for the elevator just 2 months before we lost her. So it was hard to accept that it was her time. And it's just so easy to come in and say, well, they are old and they died.
Well, what was your reaction following Shamirmir's arrest and after his death in prison? That must have been a shocker.
So he was arrested in March of 2018, and I really didn't at that time put the pieces together. It wasn't until I got a call from a detective that my mother's case was being examined as a homicide. And absolutely the most devastating, terrible news to hear that. But things finally made sense that the pieces of the puzzle were together, even though they were devastating and terrible. But I'd always said God and my daddy saw what happened, and one day I would too.
And I've got to ask, what did this assisted living or retirement home have to say when all of this came to light?
So it's where all the victims were in independent living, and I'm not really able to represent what they had to say.
Okay. Well, let's talk about how we can take this awful story that you have lived through. I know that you're here to do some good. So what are some ways that family members can help to protect elderly relatives from horrific crimes like this? I mean, checking in, making sure you swing by, making sure you spend time and meet the people who are taking care of your loved ones. I know that that's a big part, but what else can people do?
The first thing is when you start looking for the property where you want to go. This is a difficult move, whether it's independent living or assisted living or nursing home. You, the family member, are watching your loved one, seeing how comfortable they are. You're looking at the ambiance of the property, and they are selling a resort-like lifestyle with all of these great, wonderful amenities. So you need to look beyond that. You need to. When I go in, I say, I don't need to see your restaurant and your dining room and your theater. Right. I want to see your loading dock and your garage. So you need to just go in and look with security at the forefront of your mind.
That's really smart. And really quick before you go, I've got to ask you, tell us more about Secure Our Senior Safety and what kind of work that organization is doing to spread awareness.
We are victim family members who came together, and we are determined to increase awareness of vulnerabilities in senior living so that others don't have this experience. And we do that by sharing information, going out and doing talks, and we go to Austin and work on legislation.
Shannon Dion, you are doing God's work being here tonight and telling everyone what you've been through. I know that this is very difficult. We want to thank you for sharing your story, and we are wishing you the very best of luck with everything ahead.
Thank you for letting us share the story. Thank you, Shannon.
We have to take a quick break, but don't go anywhere. Grammy-nominated singer Trey Songz has been ordered to write a check for $11 million. This is a story we want to tell you about simply because he didn't bother showing up for court. How is that possible? I'll explain that next. If you ever have the misfortune of being sued by someone, there are a few important things to do. Number one, get a good lawyer. Number two, get your story straight. And number three, don't ghost the person suing you. Grammy-nominated singer Trey Songz learned that the hard way, and it's probably going to cost him millions. In November of 2021, he was in Vegas for his 37th birthday. At the end of the night, he brought back a bunch of women to his hotel room. Look, it happens. One of the women says she decided she didn't want to be there, but was stopped from leaving by Songz and his security team. Turned out she's married to a Maryland Capitol police officer, and she texted him to come get her. When the cop arrived, he says he heard his wife screaming for help and barged in. Songz and his security didn't like that, and the officer says he was badly beaten and hurt. Songz was cleared of any criminal wrongdoing, but the cop, Tyrell Dunn, sued him anyway. And according to court documents, Songz never responded to the suit, which led to a default judgment being entered against him. He's now been ordered to pay more than $11 million in damages. Imagine that. And that does it for us tonight. Don't forget to check out NewsNation's brand new app. It's really cool. You scan it, you can watch it, you can listen to it. It's pretty cool. And please join me on Thanksgiving. I'll be filling in for Elizabeth Vargas Reports at 5 p.m. Eastern, and Cuomo starts next. Thanks for being here tonight.
Everybody, I'm Brian Enton in for Chris Cuomo tonight. It has been 3 weeks since Kamala Harris and the Democrats took a shellacking by Trump. And today we finally heard from the people in charge of the Harris-Walz campaign. They gave an interview. They're finally speaking out. They spoke to Pod Save America. And in that interview, Harris's campaign chair, Jen O'Malley Dillon, tried to explain away some of their $1.5 billion with a B, dollar spending. Take a look at this.
Call her daddy was really an important choice to make. It can look